I should have remained silent. Instead, I assessed his cruelty in front of 10,000 foreigners. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the observation deck of the massive diplomatic vessel Concordia, watching as another transport ship docked with the station. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see delegates from the Zephyrian Republic stepping onto the docking platform. Their blue skin shimmered under the artificial lights, and their tall, graceful forms moved with the flowing motions that made them famous throughout the galaxy. Elena adjusted her data pad and made notes about their body language. As the only human xenopsychologist aboard the Concordia, her job was to observe and analyze the behavior of all 47 species attending the first Galactic Unity Summit. It was the most important diplomatic gathering in recorded history, and everyone knew that the future of peace in their sector depended on its success. "Another beautiful morning in space," said Commander Torres, walking up beside her. The middle-aged human officer carried the cups of coffee, offering one to Elena. "Though I suppose morning and night don't mean much out here." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thanks, Marcus. How are the preparations going?" "Slowly," Torres replied, taking a sip. "Each species has their own requirements. The crystalline collective needs their section kept at exactly -40 degrees. The flame dancers want their quarters heated to temperatures that would cook most of us. And don't get me started on the atmospheric requirements." Elena smiled. "That's the easy part. Wait until they all start talking to each other." She had been studying interspecies communication for over 15 years. Her research had taken her to dozens of worlds, learning how different cultures express emotions, resolve conflicts, and build trust. The Concordia represented the ultimate test of everything she had learned. The station itself was a marvel of engineering. Built by a coalition of 12 different species, it was designed to accommodate the needs of every known sentient race. The central hub contained meeting halls that could be configured for any type of gathering. Residential sections branched out like spokes of a wheel, each one customized for different environmental needs. "Dr. Vasquez, please report to conference." Room Alpha came an announcement over the communication system. Elena finished her coffee quickly. "Duty calls." The morning briefing. She made her way through the curved corridors of the station. The walls displayed a constantly changing series of artworks from different worlds. Designed to make every species feel welcome, she passed a group of insectoid hive speakers clicking and buzzing in their musical language, followed by Tatal, plant-like Verdani delegates whose leaves rustled as they walked. Conference Room Alpha was already filled when Ellen arrived. Admiral Chen, the human representative and summit coordinator, stood at the head of a long table surrounded by liaison officers from various species. The room's environment was kept at a compromised temperature and atmosphere that most species could tolerate with minimal life support. "Good morning, everyone," Admiral Chen began. "Today marks the official opening of the Galactic Unity Summit. I want to review the schedule and address any last-minute concerns." Elena took her seat and activated her recording device. Her role during these meetings was to observe the interactions between different species representatives and identify potential points of friction. Before they became serious problems, the opening ceremony will begin at 1400 hours, the Admiral continued. Each delegation will have the opportunity to present their formal greetings to the Assembly. Following that, we'll move into the first round of general discussions about trade agreements. A Zephyrian delegate raised one of her forearms. "Admiral Chen, what security measures are in place?" For the arrival of the Velter delegation, Elena felt the mood in the room shift immediately. Every species represented at the table had some history with the Velter Empire, and most of it was unpleasant. The Velter had spent the last century expanding their territory through a combination of military pressure and economic manipulation. They weren't technically at war with anyone, but their methods of diplomacy left much to be desired. The Velter Hegemarch will arrive with a security detail of no more than 50 individuals. Admiral Chen replied carefully. "All weapons will be kept in a secure area separate from the diplomatic sections. Standard protocols will apply." A crystalline collective representative chimed in with their bell-like voice. "Has the Hegemarch been informed of the behavioral expectations for this gathering?" Elena had to suppress a smile. The crystalline beings were known for their direct communication style. They didn't understand why other species bother with what they called emotional deception. All delegates have received the same briefing materials, the Admiral answered diplomatically. Elena made notes about the nervous energy in the room. She had studied the Velter extensively, and she knew that their leader, Hegemar Kicksthal, was skilled at psychological manipulation. He used fear and intimidation as tools of statecraft, and he was very good at finding the weaknesses in other species' cultural norms. The briefing continued for another hour, covering logistical details and emergency procedures. When it ended, Eleanor remained behind to speak with Admiral Chen privately. Admiral, I'd like permission to attend all sessions where the Hegemarch will be present, she said. Chen looked up from his data pad. Any particular reason? The Velter leadership style relies heavily on psychological pressure. If there are going to be problems, they'll start with how Kicksthal interacts with the other delegates during public sessions. Granted, the Admiral said, but Elena, remember that your role here is to observe and advise. We can't afford any diplomatic incidents. Elena nodded. Understood, sir. She left the conference room and made her way to the main assembly hall. The vast space could hold over 10,000 beings, with seating arrangements designed to accommodate every type of physiology represented at the summit. Floating platforms provided space for the gaseous nebula dwellers, while reinforced sections could support the massive weight of the rock shepherds. As Eleanor walked through the empty hall, she tried to imagine what it would be like when it was filled with representatives from 47 different worlds. Each species would bring their own expectations, their own fears, and their own hopes for the future. Her job was to help them all find common ground. A sudden commotion near the docking bay caught her attention. Through the hall's windows, she could see a massive black ship approaching the station. Its angular design and dark coloring made it look more like a weapon than a diplomatic vessel. The Velter had arrived. Eleanor watched as the ship docked with mechanical precision. Soon, she would meet the being who had caused more fear and uncertainty in this galaxy than any other single individual. She had studied his psychological profile, read reports of his methods, and analyzed recordings of his past diplomatic encounters, but she had never seen him in person. As she prepared to leave the assembly hall, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The main assembly hall buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from 47 different worlds took their seats. Eleanor positioned herself in the observation gallery, her datapad ready to record every detail of the interactions below. The opening ceremony had gone smoothly, with each species presenting their formal greetings according to ancient diplomatic traditions. Now came the real test. Hegemar Kicksthal entered the hall like a storm cloud rolling across a peaceful sky. He was tall, even by Velter standards, with dark purple skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His forearms moved with calculated precision, and his large, black eyes scanned the assembly with the cold assessment of a predator. Evaluating prey. Behind him walked 50 Velter guards in perfect formation. Their presence was technically within the agreed limits, but Eleanor could see how their military bearing made the other delegates uncomfortable. Everything about the Hegemarch's entrance was designed to establish dominance before a single word was spoken. Honored delegates, Kicksthal began, his voice carrying easily through the hall's advanced acoustics. I bring greetings from the mighty Velter Empire to this gathering of neighbors. Eleanor made notes about his word choice. He had deliberately avoided calling it a peace summit, instead using the more neutral term gathering. It was a small thing, but it set the tone for everything that followed. Admiral Chen stood to respond. Hegemar Kicksthal, we welcome you to the Galactic Unity Summit. We hope this gathering will mark the beginning of a new era of cooperation between all our peoples. Cooperation, Kicksthal repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes, the Velter Empire has always been interested in cooperation. We have cooperated with many species over the years. Some have found this cooperation more beneficial than others. Eleanor watched the body language of the other delegates change. The Zephyrians shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The crystalline collective's representatives chimed softly among themselves, their version of nervous whispers. Even the normally calm Verdani delegates rustled their leaves in agitation. The first session focused on trade agreements. Representatives from the peaceful Ophidian worlds presented their proposals. For expanded commerce routes, the Ophidians were snake-like beings, known for their fairness and honesty in business dealings. Their delegate, Ambassador Seth, spoke with the gentle authority that came from centuries of successful negotiations. The Ophidian collective proposes establishing neutral trading posts at key hyperspace junction points. Ambassador Seth explained. These stations would be jointly operated by all participating species, ensuring fair access to trade routes for everyone. It was a reasonable proposal that would benefit smaller species, who couldn't afford to maintain their own trading infrastructure. Elena watched as delegates from various worlds nodded in agreement. The proposal had strong support. Then Kixthul stood to respond. Ambassador Seth, he said, his voice carrying a tone of false concern, your proposal shows the admirable optimism of your people. However, I wonder if the Ophidian collective has fully considered the complexities of such an arrangement. Elena felt her professional interest sharpen. She recognized the technique immediately. Kixthul was about to undermine the Ophidian proposal by appearing to be helpful, while actually sowing doubt. You see, the Hegemarch continued. The Velter Empire has extensive experience with trade route security. We have learned that idealistic approaches often lead to unfortunate results. Pirates, smugglers, and other criminals are attracted to poorly defended trading posts like scavengers to a carcass. Ambassador Seth's scales shimmered with barely controlled emotion. Hegemarch, our security projections account for such possibilities. The joint operation model includes shared defense responsibilities. Kixthul's laugh was like ice cracking. Shared defense, Ambassador. With all due respect to your people's many virtues, military affairs have never been the Ophidian collective's strength. Your species is known for many admirable qualities. Your honesty, your patience, your willingness to see the best in others. But these same qualities that make you excellent traders also make you vulnerable to those who would exploit your trusting nature. Elena watched as the Hegemarch systematically dissected the Ophidian proposal. He never directly insulted anyone, but his words carried clear implications. He suggested that the Ophidians were naive, that their allies were unreliable, and that only the Velter Empire had the strength to properly secure trade routes. Perhaps, Kixthul continued, a more practical approach would be for the Velter Empire to provide security for these trading posts. We have the resources, the experience, and the proven track record. Of course, such services would require appropriate compensation. But surely the cost of security is a small price to pay for the protection of valuable cargo and innocent lives. Ambassador Seth's response was barely audible. We will need to consider all options. Of course, Elena could see the psychological damage being done. The Ophidian delegate was retreating, his confidence shattered by Kixthul's careful words. Other delegates were beginning to doubt the proposal as well, their certainty eroded by the Hegemarch's apparent expertise. This was exactly the kind of behavior Elena had expected. But seeing it in person made her anger rise. Kixthul was using classic manipulation techniques, false concern, implied threats, and the positioning of himself as the only viable solution to problems he had helped create. If I may address the assembly, Elena heard herself saying as she stood up in the observation gallery. The hall fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. Elena realized with sudden clarity that she had just violated diplomatic protocol by speaking without permission during a formal session. But it was too late to back down now. Admiral Chen looked up at her with surprise and concern. Dr. Vasquez, this is highly irregular. I apologize, Admiral, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. But as the summit's Xenop psychologist, I believe I can provide valuable cultural context for what we're witnessing here. She walked down from the observation gallery to the main floor, feeling 10,000 eyes following her movement. Her heart was beating fast, but her mind was crystal clear. She had spent 15 years studying exactly this kind of interaction. Honored delegates, she began, I've been observing this exchange with great interest. As a student of interspecies psychology, I recognize several fascinating patterns in the Hegemark's communication style. Kick-Stull S4. Arms crossed over his chest. Doctor, I'm sure your academic perspective is valuable, but we are discussing practical matters of trade and security. Actually, Hegemark, that's exactly what makes this so interesting, Eleanor replied calmly. Your approach to this discussion demonstrates several classic psychological techniques that are worth examining. She turned to address the full assembly. What we've just witnessed is a textbook example of what human psychology calls concern trolling, expressing false worry about problems that the speaker has no intention of helping solve. The Hegemark raised security concerns not because he wants to help improve the Ophidian proposal, but because he wants to position the Welter Empire as the only viable alternative. A murmur ran through the assembly. Elena could see some delegates leaning forward with interest while others looked uncomfortable with this unprecedented analysis. Furthermore, Elena continued, the systematic undermining of Ambassador Seth's confidence follows a pattern we call negging, offering backhanded compliments that sound positive, but actually serve to lower the target's self-esteem. Notice how the Hegemark praised Ophidian virtues while simultaneously suggesting those same virtues make them unsuitable for the task at hand. Kick-Stull's black eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that would have terrified most beings. Doctor, your human perspective may not fully grasp the complexities of galactic politics. On the contrary, Elena said, meeting his gaze steadily, human psychology has studied these patterns extensively. What you're demonstrating is a classic dominance display, designed to establish psychological superiority through the appearance of superior knowledge and capability. It's actually quite predictable once you understand the underlying motivations. The hall was completely silent now. Elena knew she was walking a dangerous line, but she also knew she was right. Everything Kick-Stull had done followed patterns she had studied for years. The most interesting aspect, she continued, is how this behavior often stems from deep insecurity rather than actual strength. The need to constantly assert dominance typically indicates fear of being perceived as inadequate or inferior. Kick-Stull's composure finally cracked. His four hands clenched into fists, and his voice rose. How dare you analyze me like some laboratory specimen? The Welter Empire will not tolerate such disrespect from a primitive species that barely understands its own psychology, much less that of superior beings. Elena smiled calmly. And there's the validation of my analysis. Thank you. Hegemark. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence in the assembly hall stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. 10,000 beings from 47 different worlds stared at the tableau before them. A human Xenop psychologist standing calmly while the most feared ruler in the galaxy trembled with rage. Hegemark Kick-Stull's forearms shook as he pointed at Elena. This is an outrage, an insult to the dignity of the Welter Empire. I demand immediate satisfaction for this offense. Admiral Chen quickly stepped forward, trying to restore order. Hegemark, please, let's discuss this calmly. Dr. Vasquez was providing academic analysis, not making personal attacks. Academic analysis. Kick-Stull's voice echoed through the hall. She called me insecure. She suggested that the mighty Welter Empire is driven by fear. This cannot stand. Eleanor remained perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back. She had expected this reaction, but seeing it play out in real time was still remarkable. Every word Kick-Stull spoke only proved her analysis correct. Hegemark, she said quietly, I was discussing behavioral patterns, not making judgments about your character or your empire's strength. If you perceive my observations as personal attacks, that might be worth examining. The purple-skinned ruler's eyes widened with fury. You dare to continue your analysis? Guards, prepare for immediate departure. The Welter Empire will not remain in this place of dishonor for one moment longer. As the Welter delegation began their dramatic exit, Elena noticed something interesting happening in the audience. Instead of the fear, and submission that usually followed Kixthul's outbursts. Many delegates were watching with fascination. The crystalline collective representatives were chiming softly to each other in what Elena recognized as their equivalent of excitement. Even some of the more timid species were sitting up straighter, as if seeing the Hegemarch's reaction had somehow freed them from a spell. Ambassador Seth slithered over to Elena as the Velter guards filed out of the hall. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, his serpentine voice filled with wonder. "In all my years of diplomacy, I have never seen anyone speak to the Hegemarch like that." "I was just doing my job," Elena replied, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. She had let her emotions drive her actions, and now she would have to face the consequences. Admiral Chen approached with a grim expression. "Dr. Vasquez, my office." Now, the next few hours were a blur of emergency meetings and urgent communications. Elena sat in Admiral Chen's office while a steady stream of officials came and went. Some were angry about the diplomatic incident she had caused. Others were curious about her analysis. A few seemed almost excited about what had happened. "Elena," Admiral Chen said when they were finally alone, "do you understand what you've done?" "I've probably ended my career," she admitted. "But I couldn't just sit there and watch him tear down Ambassador Seth's confidence like that. It was textbook psychological manipulation. It was also effective psychological manipulation," the Admiral pointed out. "The Velter Empire has been using these tactics for over a century. Every species in this sector has learned to accommodate their methods. Because the alternative is conflict." Elena nodded. "I know. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've been enabling this behavior instead of challenging it." Before Admiral Chen could respond, Commander Torres burst into the office. "Admiral, you need to see this. The communications department is being flooded with messages from across the galaxy." They hurried to the communications center, where dozens of technicians were working frantically to manage incoming transmissions. The main display showed a map of known space with thousands of blinking lights, indicating active communications. "What's happening?" Admiral Chen asked. Lieutenant Park looked up from her console. "Sir, it started about an hour ago. Someone recorded Dr. Vasquez's analysis and transmitted it on open channels. It's spreading faster than we can track. Every major news network is picking it up." Elena stared at the display in amazement. She had never imagined that her moment of professional judgment would spread beyond the assembly hall. "Show me," Admiral Chen ordered. The main screen switched to a news broadcast. From the Zephyrian Republic, the blue-skinned anchor was speaking, rapidly in her musical language, but the translation appeared in text below. "Unprecedented moment as a human psychologist. Publicly analyzed the behavior of Hegemarch Kixthul. For the first time, someone has explained the techniques that the Velter Empire has used to maintain psychological dominance over neighboring species." Another screen showed a broadcast from the Crystalline Collective. Their bell-like voices were chiming in excitement as they discussed what they called the human revelation about emotional deception tactics. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park called out, "we're getting reports from Velter territory as well. Underground networks are sharing the recording on dozens of occupied worlds." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Underground networks, Commander." Torres nodded grimly. "Species under Velter control. Worlds that have been forced into their empire through the same psychological tactics you described. They're seeing their oppressor in a completely different light." The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. She had intended to expose one individual's manipulation tactics. Instead, she had apparently given hope to entire populations who had been living under psychological oppression. "Sir," another technician called out, "we're receiving a formal communication from the Velter Empire." Admiral Chen straightened. "Put it through." Hegemarch Kixthul appeared on the main screen, his forearms crossed and his black eyes burning with fury. Behind him stood a group of Velter military officers in full ceremonial armor. "Admiral Chen," Kixthul began, his voice cold and controlled. "The Velter Empire formally protests the disgraceful behavior exhibited at your so-called peace summit. The human cult Elena Vasquez has committed an act of psychological warfare against a sovereign ruler." Elena stepped forward, Hegemark. I was providing academic analysis of communication patterns. If that constitutes warfare, then perhaps we should examine why explaining behavior feels like an attack. Kicksthull's composure slipped again. You will not speak. Your words have caused unrest throughout civilized space. Rebel groups on 17 worlds are using your recording to spread lies about Vilter leadership methods. I didn't spread any lies, Elena said calmly. I simply described what I observed using standard psychological terminology. The damage has been done, Kicksthull continued. The Vilter Empire demands immediate reparations for this insult. Furthermore, we require the surrender of the human Elena Vasquez to face justice for her crimes against imperial dignity. Admiral Chen stepped protectively in front of Elena. That's not going to happen, Hegemark. Dr. Vasquez is under the protection of the Earth Alliance. Then the Earth Alliance shares responsibility for her actions, Kicksthull declared. You have 72 hours to reconsider your position. If satisfactory reparations are not provided, the Vilter Empire will be forced to seek other methods of obtaining justice. The transmission ended, leaving the communications center in tense silence. Other methods. Commander Torres repeated quietly. That sounds like a threat of military action. Elena sank into a nearby chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting her. I never intended for any of this to happen. I just wanted to help people understand what was really going on. Elena, Admiral Chen said gently, what's done is done. The question now is what we do next. Lieutenant Park looked up from her console again. Admiral, we're receiving another communication. This one is from the Ophidian Collective. Put it through. Ambassador Seth appeared on the screen, but he looked different than he had that morning. His posture was straighter, more confident. Behind him stood representatives from several other species. Admiral Chen, Dr. Vasquez, he began, his voice stronger than Elena had ever heard it. We wanted to thank you for opening our eyes to something we should have recognized long ago. The analysis provided by Dr. Vasquez has helped us understand not just the Hegemark's behavior, but our own responses to it. Elena blinked in surprise. Ambassador, I never meant to create a diplomatic crisis. Dr. Vasquez, Seth replied. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones that create the biggest disruptions. We have been discussing your observations with our respective governments. Many of us have realized that we have been enabling harmful behavior by treating it as normal diplomacy. Admiral Chen leaned forward. What are you saying, Ambassador? We are saying that perhaps it is time for a new approach to galactic diplomacy, one based on honest communication rather than psychological manipulation. Dr. Vasquez has shown us that understanding the truth about behavior is the first step toward changing it. As the transmission ended, Elena realized that her moment of professional honesty had started something much larger than she had ever imagined. Across the galaxy, beings were beginning to question assumptions they had held for generations. But she also knew that Kicksthull would not accept this challenge. To his authority quietly, the real test was yet to come. The war room aboard the Concordia buzzed with activity, as representatives from 23 allied species worked together to prepare for what seemed like an inevitable conflict. Elena stood before a massive tactical display showing the positions of various fleets throughout the sector. Red indicators marked Vilter forces, while blue dots represented the hastily assembled Alliance fleet. The numbers don't look good, Commander Torres admitted, pointing at the display. The Vilter Empire has 3 times our firepower and twice as many ships. If this comes down to a straight military confrontation, we're going to lose. Admiral Chen nodded grimly, which is why we need to find another way. Elena, you started this situation. Do you have any ideas about how we might resolve it? Elena had been studying psychological warfare tactics for the past 48 hours, ever since it became clear that Kicksthull was serious about military action. Her analysis had already caused more change in galactic politics than she had ever imagined possible. Now she needed to find a way to turn psychological insight into strategic advantage. The key is understanding what really drives the Hegemark, she said, activating a holographic display of her research. Everything he does is about maintaining the appearance of absolute control. His entire empire is built on the idea that he is psychologically superior to everyone else. Ambassador Seth, who had arrived that morning with a delegation of allied species, raised one of his scaled hands. Dr. Vasquez, how does this help us in a military situation? Because military conflicts aren't just about weapons and tactics, Elena explained. They're also about morale, leadership, and decision-making under pressure. If we can undermine Kix-Thul's psychological foundation, we can affect his ability to command effectively. Captain Yathara of the Zephyrian Republic leaned forward, her blue skin shimmering with interest. You're suggesting we fight a war using psychology instead of weapons? Not instead of weapons, Elena corrected. In addition to weapons, every military engagement has a psychological component. The difference is that most commanders don't think about it systematically. Elena brought up a new display showing communication patterns within the Velter fleet. Look at this. Their entire command structure depends on Kix-Thul's personal authority. His subordinates follow orders not because they believe in the mission, but because they fear his displeasure. That's actually a weakness, not a strength. Commander Torres studied the data. Explain. Fear-based leadership creates brittle command structures, Elena said. When the person at the top starts making poor decisions, subordinates are afraid to question or correct those decisions. It leads to what we call cascading failure. One bad choice leads to another, and another, until the entire system collapses. Admiral Chen was beginning to look interested. So how do we trigger this cascading failure? Elena smiled for the first time in days. We create situations that trigger Kix-Thul's deepest psychological insecurities. Based on my analysis, he has several predictable response patterns. If we can manipulate those patterns, we can get him to make strategic mistakes. Over the next 6 hours, Elena worked with the Alliance military commanders to develop what they called psychological warfare protocols. The idea was to design battle scenarios that would specifically target Kix-Thul's known psychological weaknesses. His greatest fear is being seen as inadequate, Elena explained to the assembled commanders. So we create situations where his responses will look weak or foolish to his own people. We broadcast his reactions across all frequencies, including internal Velter communications. Captain Drine of the Crystalline Collective chimed thoughtfully. This approach requires precise timing and coordination. Exactly, Elena agreed. Every engagement needs to be choreographed to create maximum psychological impact. We're not just fighting a battle, we're telling a story about leadership, competence, and the difference between real strength and the illusion of strength. The plan they developed was complex but elegant. The Alliance fleet would engage in a series of small skirmishes, designed to showcase Kix-Thul's tactical weaknesses. Each encounter would be carefully planned to reveal different aspects of his psychological limitations. Most importantly, every engagement would be broadcast live across the galaxy, turning military conflict into public education about effective leadership. Phase 1 begins in 6 hours, Admiral Chen announced. Elena, are you sure this will work? I'm sure about the psychology, Elena replied. Military tactics aren't my specialty, but I know how Kix-Thul's mind works. If we can implement the plan correctly, he'll defeat himself. The first engagement took place near a contested asteroid field. The Alliance forces, led by Captain Yathara's fast Zephyrian ships, appeared to attack a Velter patrol group, but instead of pressing the attack, they retreated after causing minimal damage. Elena watched from the Concordia's command center. As Kix-Thul's image appeared on the main communication screen, he was addressing his own fleet. But Elena had arranged for the transmission to be intercepted and rebroadcast. Cowards, Kix-Thul declared to his officers. They run like frightened children because they know they cannot face the might of the Velter Empire. But Elena could see what the Hegemarch couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. The Zephyrian retreat had been perfectly timed and executed. They had gathered detailed intelligence about Velter ship capabilities and defensive patterns, while losing no ships of their own. It was a tactical victory disguised as a retreat. Phase 2. Elena announced. The second engagement was more complex, Alliance forces appeared to accidentally stumble into a Velter supply convoy. The resulting battle looked chaotic and unplanned, with Alliance ships seeming to barely escape after a confused fight. Kicksthull's response was predictable. See how they flail about without purpose. He told his commanders, they have no strategy, no coordination. They are nothing more than a rabble of inferior species pretending to be a military force. But Elena was recording everything. The Hegemarch's dismissive attitude, his failure to recognize the intelligence-gathering nature of the Alliance's actions, his overconfidence in his own tactical superiority. It was all being broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. More importantly, it was being heard by his own people. Phase 3, Elena said quietly. The third engagement was the key test. Alliance forces appeared to launch a desperate attack on a major Velter fleet position. The attack was doomed from the start, or so it appeared. But Elena had carefully planned every aspect of the encounter to trigger Kicksthull's need to demonstrate his superiority. As expected, the Hegemarch took personal command of the defense. He positioned his ships in an aggressive formation designed to crush the Alliance attack quickly and decisively. His tactical communications were full of contempt for the primitive strategies being used against him, but the Alliance attack was never meant to succeed. It was designed to lure Kicksthull into a position where his own psychological needs would override sound military judgment. Now, Elena whispered, the real Alliance fleet, hidden behind a nearby moon, emerged and attacked Kicksthull's exposed flanks. The Hegemarch had been so focused on demonstrating his superiority over what he thought was the main Alliance force that he had left himself vulnerable to the actual strategic strike. Elena watched as confusion spread through the Velter command structure. Kicksthull's overconfident positioning had put his fleet at a serious disadvantage. Worse, his subordinates could see that their leader's psychological need to prove his dominance had led directly to tactical failure. Retreat, Kicksthull finally ordered, but the damage was done. The mighty Velter fleet was withdrawing from what should have been an easy victory. Across the galaxy, beings who had lived in fear of Velter's psychological dominance watched as their oppressors' weaknesses were revealed in real time. Elena's analysis had become a practical demonstration of the difference between genuine leadership and manipulative control, but she knew this was only the beginning. Kicksthull would not accept this humiliation quietly. The real confrontation was still to come. Admiral, she said, we need to prepare for his final move. When a narcissistic leader's psychological foundation is threatened, they often respond with desperate and dangerous actions. Admiral Chen nodded. What do you think he'll do? Elena studied the tactical display, thinking about everything she knew about Kicksthull's psychology. He'll challenge me directly. This has become personal for him now. He can't let a human psychologist be responsible for his public humiliation. That could be exactly what we need, the Admiral replied. One final confrontation to end this once and for all. Elena stood alone in the center of the Concordia's main assembly hall, which had been transformed into a broadcast center. Cameras from 47 different worlds focused on her as she waited for what she knew would be the most important conversation of her life. Across the galaxy, billions of beings were watching, waiting to see how this unprecedented confrontation would end. Admiral Chen's voice came through her earpiece. Elena, his ship is approaching. Are you ready for this? She took a deep breath, as ready as anyone can be for a psychological duel broadcast to the entire galaxy. The main screen activated, showing Hegemarch Kicksthull aboard his flagship. But Elena immediately noticed something different. About him, his usually perfect posture was slightly slumped. His forearms moved with less precision than before. Most telling of all, his large black eyes held something Elena had never seen there before. Uncertainty, human, Kicksthull began, his voice carrying across space to every corner of known civilization. You have caused enough chaos with your primitive theories. It ends now. Elena remained calm, drawing on every technique she had learned from managing difficult conversations. Hegemarch, I'm honored that you want to speak with me directly. What would you like to discuss? Discuss? Kicksthull's voice rose slightly. There's nothing to discuss. You have spread lies about the Vilter Empire and its leadership. You have encouraged rebellion among inferior species who should be grateful for our guidance. I haven't spread any lies, Eleanor replied evenly. I simply describe behavioral patterns using standard psychological terminology. If my observations seem to match what people have experienced under Velta rule, perhaps that's worth examining. Eleanor could see Kixthal's hands clenching and unclenching, a clear sign of growing agitation. She had studied his psychological profile extensively, and she knew exactly which topics would trigger his deepest insecurities. Hegemark, she continued, I've been wondering about something. In all my research about the Vilter Empire's expansion, I noticed an interesting pattern. Your empire grew most rapidly during periods when neighboring species were dealing with internal conflicts or natural disasters. You rarely engaged in direct military conquest against strong, unified opponents. Kixthal's posture stiffened. The Vilter Empire expands through superior strategy and planning. We strike when victory is assured because we are intelligent, not because we are weak. That's certainly one way to interpret it, Eleanor agreed. But another interpretation might be that the Empire's growth strategy has always been based on exploiting weakness rather than demonstrating strength. Taking advantage of vulnerable populations requires a different skill set. Than facing equal opponents, you dare question the military might of the Velter Empire? Kixthal demanded. We have conquered hundreds of worlds. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Yes, you have. But isn't it interesting that most of those conquests involved species that were already weakened by war, plague, or economic collapse? It's actually quite clever from a strategic perspective. Why risk costly battles when you can simply wait for the right moment to step in as the protector of struggling populations? She could see that her words were having an effect. Kixthal's carefully maintained image of invincible conquest was being reframed as opportunistic exploitation. Across the galaxy, beings who had lived under Velta rule were hearing their own experiences validated and explained. But here's what I find most fascinating, Eleanor continued. This strategy only works if everyone believes that the Velter Empire is genuinely superior. The moment people realize that your power comes from exploiting weakness, rather than demonstrating strength, the entire system becomes vulnerable. Kixthal's voice cracked slightly. The Velter Empire is superior. We have maintained order across hundreds of star systems for over a century. Order, Eleanor repeated. That's an interesting word choice. Not prosperity, not happiness, not growth order. The kind of order that comes from fear rather than respect. The kind of order that collapses the moment people stop being afraid. Eleanor could see that she was approaching the heart of Kixthal's psychological foundation. Everything he had built was based on the belief that fear was strength. That intimidation was leadership. That control was the same as competence. Hegemark. She said gently, what would happen to your empire if people stopped being afraid of you? For a moment, Kixthal said nothing. His forearms hung at his sides, and his usually commanding presence seemed to deflate when he finally spoke. His voice was quieter than Eleanor had ever heard it. They would leave, he admitted. They would all leave. Yes, Eleanor said softly. They would. And that's what's already starting to happen, isn't it? The recordings of our previous conversations have spread across your territory. People are beginning to understand that the fear they've lived with wasn't necessary, that the protection you offered came at the cost of their freedom and dignity. Eleanor could see tears forming in Kixthal's large black eyes. The psychological armor he had worn for decades was finally cracking, revealing the frightened individual underneath. I never meant, he began, then stopped. What didn't you mean? Eleanor asked gently. I never meant for them to suffer. Kixthal whispered. I thought if I was strong enough, if I was feared enough, I could protect everyone. I could keep order. I could prevent the chaos and violence that destroyed my home world when I was young. Eleanor felt a surge of understanding. You were trying to protect people the only way you knew how. But fear-based protection isn't really protection at all, is it? It's just another form of harm. Kixthal's composure completely collapsed. I don't know how to lead without fear. I don't know how to be strong without making others feel weak. It's the only way I've ever known. Elena's voice filled with compassion. Then maybe it's time to learn a different way. Real strength doesn't come from making others afraid. It comes from helping them become stronger themselves across the galaxy. Beings watched in amazement as the most feared ruler in known space broke down and admitted his failures. But more than that, they saw something unprecedented, a leader taking responsibility for the harm he had caused. What should I do? Kicksthull asked, his voice like a lost child's. Start by acknowledging the harm you've caused, Elena suggested. Then work to repair it. Give people the choice to leave your empire if they want to. Help them build their own strength instead of depending on yours. Learn what it means to lead through inspiration rather than intimidation. Elena could see Kicksthull struggling with these concepts. Everything she was suggesting went against decades of ingrained behavior, but she could also see something else in his eyes. Hope. It won't be easy, she continued. Changing fundamental patterns of behavior never is. But the alternative is watching your empire crumble, as more and more people choose freedom over fear. Kicksthull straightened slightly, and for a moment Elena saw what he might have been like before fear and insecurity had twisted his character. You would help me, after everything I've done. The goal was never to destroy you, Hegemark. It was to help people understand that they had choices. That includes you. You can choose to be different. The transmission continued for another hour, as Elena guided Kicksthull through the beginning of what would clearly be a long process of psychological healing and growth. By the end, he had publicly committed to releasing all species from forced membership in the Velter Empire and establishing a new form of voluntary cooperation based on mutual benefit, rather than fear. 6 months later, Elena stood in the newly constructed Galactic Institute of Psychological Sciences, watching students from dozens of different species learn about interspecies communication and conflict resolution. The institute had been built on the foundation of her moment of foolish honesty in the assembly hall. Ambassador Seth slithered up beside her. Dr. Vasquez, the morning classes are about to begin. Are you ready to teach the next generation of galactic diplomats? Elena smiled, remembering how this had all started, with her inability to remain silent in the face of psychological manipulation. I think I am, Ambassador, after all. Sometimes the most important lessons come from learning to speak truth when silence would be easier. Through the Institute's windows, she could see ships from the former Velter Empire working alongside vessels from dozens of other species. The galaxy was far from perfect, but it was learning, and that, Elena thought, was the most human contribution of all, the belief that understanding could lead to positive change. In the end, her assessment of one being's behavior had become the foundation for a new way of thinking about power, leadership, and the courage to speak truth to those who needed to hear it most.